where there's an appetite to unfix something, what if that's possible? What if that's possible? Yeah. Where there's an appetite to unfix something, what if that is possible?
Hello. Today we are dancing with Matthias Sperling.
Hello.
It's such a pleasure to have you here and to be in the studio with you.
Very nice to see you too. Very nice to see you in the UK.
Yes. So we met actually 2018. I mean, at least the time I remember us meeting, and that was at a PhD practice week in Stockholm, where I had a practice of no questions, only answers, which I think you probably participated in, which was lovely. And this was the first time I met you, and I remember, because I knew of you, you were already very successful in the UK when I was studying here, and I had heard of your name, but unfortunately hadn't got to connect. And then I got a taste of it in 2018 of your genius or your brilliance. But I feel very fortunate to be able to continue this conversation. And exactly as you say, to meet here where you are more or less based, right?
Yeah.
If people don't know you, how do you introduce yourself? Or how would you introduce yourself today, perhaps?
How would I introduce myself today? I am an artist, a choreographer, performer, researcher. I guess I sort of increasingly describe myself as a researcher because I am often involved in research. I was born in Canada, in Toronto, and I started dancing there. Yeah. And I moved here in the mid-late 90s. So I've been in London for a very long time, based in the UK. And most of my work has happened based here, where I danced with a few companies in the beginning, and I then started to make my own work more. And I've done various things. Various ways of learning along the way. And then the more recent things for me have been that I did a PhD here in the UK, and some of the practice that I propose to share with you today is related to that. Might even be a little bit related to, if we did anything together that I led in 2018, then it would be... I think
we did, yeah.
It would be more of that.
Great. Well, that's great.
Or evolutions of that.
I'm not a beginner.
And so I finished that in 2022. And also I've been co-leading a research project that is an interdisciplinary collaboration between artists and scientists, specifically dance artists and cognitive neuroscientists. And that's a 5-year project that is already coming to a close this year. That's also what I'm involved in. And I guess a way to introduce the kind of things that I'm interested in, through the kind of lens of my PhD research, is looking at relationships between choreography and knowledge generation, and connecting that with ideas like conjuring, or I would say magic and science at the same time. So ideas about, say, the biological basis of embodied knowledge generation and the way that might be described in neuroscientific contexts, but then at the same time what I call magic. So these ideas about, say, conjuring, perhaps divination, that kind of direction, which I'm sure we can go into more.
Yeah. I mean, it's super exciting stuff. Very interesting. I already feel like there are threads to be pulled, and I think it would be nice to get a sense exactly of that conjury magic world and how it relates to dance and choreography. But what are we specifically going to do today? Like, what have you brought for us?
Well, I've kind of considered slightly different versions of the same sort of main materials that I'm interested in. I think what I'll introduce is something specific, and then what we can do might be a bit looser around the edges of that.
Yeah.
But maybe it's just a more sort of clear way to talk about it is to start somewhere specific. So in my PhD work, the sort of site of that research is a choreographic work called Know-How Generator, which is spelled Nohow, which is doesn't come across very well in audio. Know-How Generator is the name of the work, is the title of my PhD, and within that choreographic work, the sort of nucleus of the score is something that I call back and forthing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to share that with you.
Fantastic.
And also, I guess, some sort of ways into that, and then also some ways in which that has evolved a bit more recently for me.
Fantastic.
So obviously with the PhD, I have sort of lots of writing around that and like a dedicated website to that. I also wrote a written version of the choreographic score, which is part of my written PhD.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that, I have these words that I can share now, which are a sort of introduction to back and forthing as a choreographic material.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So this is sort of slightly adapted from the written choreographic score of Know-How Generator. And it introduces this sort of as it comes into the score. Back and forthing unfolds through a rhythmic yet changeable rocking motion. While the rhythmic rocking of weight remains a constant, the specific form of the movement is always evolving and adapting in relation to the perceptual feedback that you experience from your moving body and the environment around you. Your weight shifts back and forth in space, between body parts and/or spatial locations that emerge as what lights up in your felt sense perception from moment to moment. The rhythmic pendulum shift of your weight between a back and a forth remains a constant presence in space, regardless of smaller and sometimes larger changes in the shape of the movement. The work is on insisting on the possibility that your whole body at once as your teacher, a phrase from Deborah Hay, among many phrases from Deborah Hay that I quote in this score, can accommodate. The work is on insisting on the possibility that your whole body at once as your teacher can accommodate within your back and forthing what you are reading in your felt sense experience, including the curiosities or appetites that you notice emerging. While the degree and frequency of change starts out small, it can grow larger later on once the regularity of your back and forthing has become established enough to remain a continually felt presence. Back and forthing settles into a momentum that feels like it takes care of propagating itself, something like a perpetual motion generator. So you don't have to do too much, but can rather keep enlarging your experience of its unfolding. So that's a kind of introduction to this particular material, back and forthing, in Know-How Generator. And so Know-How Generator is a work that was first performed in 2019 and that I'm still happily, that we are still performing now. And a couple of things that I want to say about this that I think are important to me about this. are to do with the idea of taking a reading.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's something that I feel is a sort of umbrella for me about that many of the materials that I'm working with I'm interested in the idea of approaching dancing as a process of taking a reading.
And taking a reading, you're taking that from tarot?
Partly,
right?
Yeah.
That's where I associate to when you say the word taking a reading.
What I like about it is that it has, like I mentioned magic and science before, that for me taking a reading can have both of those kinds of connotations. So the scientific connotations would be like a measurement device that takes a reading or something. And so we can think about like my biological being or my cells as these sort of measurement devices or perceptual devices. And then from that more divinatory perspective, taking a reading can be taking a reading with tarot cards or palm readings or like reading tea leaves, all of those things. So that as a general sort of operation.
Yeah.
And then also what I'm really interested in is working with momentum and perception at the same time.
Yeah.
So we're taking a reading with momentum and perception engaged at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So if I understand, if I can already sort of try to surmise, we're going to be with this rocking motion, I assume, and we are going to be taking a reading from it, so allowing it to occur, and like you say in the text, the motion can enlarge and get small. I was wondering, is breathing already a sort of rocking motion? I was sort of, as a way to try and understand how you're thinking it. Is it like Small Dances of Steve Paxton, where we're already in movement, or are we generating the movement? Just out of curiosity, like a practical question, maybe.
Well, for me, I guess it has to do with the way that I think about momentum. And so for me, I'm thinking about my whole mass in relation to momentum.
Okay.
And so there's a relationship to gravity in a way that I think breathing doesn't necessarily have. So it's, So generally with this material, I'm working with a little bit more expanded relationship to gravity and momentum.
Great, yeah, that's clear.
Yeah. And partly, I guess, what I'm interested in is, how to, a lot of it for me has to do with being able to draw on different ways of working that I've practiced throughout my history of dance. And so this thing about momentum and the more expanded range has partly to do with how to make links with more expanded ranges.
Yes. At
the same time as working with the work that I'm very interested in relation to perception, and I mentioned Deborah Hay and this kind of, as one really important influence for me. And the score, the sort of the written score draws very heavily on sort of Deborah Hay's written scores as an example of what kind of form a written choreographic score can take. And also I work with, in this score, with a sort of, with a what-if question that addresses the whole score. And I might mention that as well, because I think that's, important to know in relation to this as well. So the question is, what if how all of my cells are doing knowing serves me well in the practice of know-how generation? And know-how generation, again, is the N-O-H-O-W, and it could be, know-how generation, whatever that might mean. What if how all of my cells are doing knowing serves me well in the practice of know-how generation.
Yes, so I see how it is really trying to be with the knowledge that you've accumulated in this vestigial body. And then the Deborah Hay score, the what if, it is suggesting that it's there in the body, and then for the know-how generation, just to sort of name that, because normally it's know K N O W, right?
Yeah.
Which is a sense of the already knowledgeable, it would be the knowledge that's needed to do something, right?
Yeah, sort of practical knowledge.
Exactly, right, practical knowledge. So this is NO, how.
Yeah.
So we're sort of imagining it's unpractical.
Yeah, perhaps something other.
Exactly.
Something that clearly sounds like it's somehow related to knowledge.
Yeah.
But somehow it's an other form of knowledge, or knowledge otherwise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Speculative.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the reading is both factual and speculative as well. So you have these fractures of knowledge. Great. I think that for me that's feeling quite clear. Is there anything else you want to say? So we will go and do this back and forthing amongst all these ideas around know-how. Is there anything else you'd like to?
Maybe just that in the choreographic work, know-how generator, myself and my collaborator Katie Coe, who performed this work together, we do this practice wearing elf ears.
Wearing elf ears?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you don't have to wear elf ears while doing this, but it is, it's very much part of this work.
Yeah.
And that for me, I was enjoying listening to some of the other podcast episodes that you've done, and there were already in there some references that I heard to Deborah Hay, I think through Kullberg connections.
Oh yeah.
And talking about lightness, and so this is also something that I really find really important, and that I find Deborah Hay really helpful with. And I also love her sentence about this, which I heard her say some years ago. I always retain the capacity to laugh at my own serious intentions, even while those intentions remain serious. And so I find that really like a crucial part of practice. Not necessarily something that I always feel capable of, but I feel I always need to keep striving for.
Yeah.
And that it is very generative in itself. And of course I say that with great seriousness. This is very typical of me, that I'm very approaching with great seriousness the reminder to try not to be so serious. But the elf ears are something that helps to do that.
Yeah. So if people do have elf ears, then they should do that. And it's sort of it jumps back to you mentioned the word conjuring. I imagine when one wears elf ears, there is a sense of conjuring something other.
Yeah.
And we can mention we're in a space which has music playing somewhere else. There's a great drone sound, which you mentioned you might use as well while we practice, while we dance. So hopefully this isn't too irritating to listen to, and maybe also adds to that magical aura.
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay then, we will pause and we'll come back in a bit.
Where there's an appetite to unfix something, what if that's possible? What if that's possible? Yeah. Where there's an appetite
Okay, so we're back. I think we can just try to recall a little bit what happened, what we remember, what we experienced. We started with what you called a sort of light version of the back and forth, and you led us going to the floor and coming up and down, and then you spoke about it as being looser to the back and forth, and I was wondering if you could maybe describe or tell a little bit more about this tightening towards this back and forth. I think you mentioned it when we spoke before, but
yeah,
if you can, I think it's an interesting.
Well, I guess there are different things. There's a sort of what are the particular parameters of a particular iteration of the practice, and those parameters can be more defined or less defined, and those might in different ways have different things that are good about them, or in terms of what they might open up towards.
Yeah.
And for the tightening of the practice, so to speak, so we eventually worked a little bit with some of this back and forthing practice, sort of closer to the form in which it begins in the score of the choreographic work Know-How Generator. And that works with, I guess, a slower rate of change. So this constancy of this rhythmic rocking back and forth, but in terms of the way that the shape of the movement becomes articulated, that there's a kind of discipline about the accumulation of information gradually over time. And so partly I think there's a kind of affordance in that from the perspective of experience, that what it opens up is the ability to stay with something.
Yeah.
And but then on another level, from a more choreographic perspective, thinking about the audience, I'm really interested in the audience, in a witness, being able to become familiar with the practice that's happening through what they're seeing. And so, for instance, that they can become familiar with the idea that there's this rocking back and forth, and that it appears that nothing is changing, but then something is changing a little bit.
Yeah.
But then it seems that nothing is changing.
Yeah.
But then something is changing, and that might be engaging.
Yeah.
And also you can settle into this rhythm of witnessing the momentum, moving in this rhythmic way. And sometimes audience members say that they sort of on their way home are still sort of feeling this sort of kinesthetic response to that rhythm, like you've sort of been by the sea, by the waves for a long time.
Seasickness.
Yeah, hopefully not the seasickness, but yeah.
But yeah.
But so for me it's important that there can be this ability for the performer to be experiencing this live, and the audience to be experiencing this live, and for those experiences together to kind of meet in the zone of whatever the material is.
Yeah.
And so that the material also allows the audience to be kind of on the journey with the material, having a sense of, to some extent, some predictability of what it is and where it seems to be going right now.
Yeah.
And then the possibility for it to become more unpredictable.
Yeah.
But the sort of baseline of sharing some meeting zone feels important to me, choreographically.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating that you bring in the sort of social contract that is sort of built, or the choreographic contract that's built with the audience, because I was thinking about how the the oscillations, and you sort of mentioned this, and maybe this is what you mean by layers. They're not singular. There's often a sort of and I was sort of very curious about, you had an insistence on momentum, right? And I think this was a very interesting insistence, because it for me feels that actually perhaps that it's between that social contract, a sort of producing of a contract of how am I recognizing the entirety of my center of gravity, maybe, or how is that felt and moved into the space? Because these oscillations, they could be quite micro and not communicative at all. Because the sort of the momentum of walking or rocking forward and backwards, and then sort of dissipating into the multiple frequencies in the body, could then sort of distill into a almost standing sort of feeling. That's the feeling I got. However, there was a sort of desire to be with the center of gravity and its momentum.
Yeah.
And maybe that relates a little bit to what you spoke of as now I'm going to forget the term, but I want to say spotlight, but it wasn't spotlight.
What lights up?
What lights up. It's a fantastic phrase, yeah, what lights up. I guess that sort of maybe is also a key into how I was also interpreting as well, like that imagination of the attention of perception being almost like a spotlight. But how does that resonate with you? This sense of the conceptualization of momentum, maybe within this, what we did now.
Well, there's a lot. So I'm curious to know a bit more about the connection you were just making between momentum and what lights up. So essentially, so I like to talk about momentum and perception. And so for me, what lights up is a kind of operation of perception, a way of working with my perception in a way that I find helpful because it's a simplification.
Yeah.
And so in effect, what lights up for me is a lot about allowing my attention to be with one or a few things at any given moment, as opposed to the sometimes overwhelming attempt to be with everything I'm perceiving on every level at the same time, which I think is more my understanding of how Deborah Hay has worked, that she doesn't sort of narrow the field of perception, but is working with everywhere that I am. And I guess sometimes I'm using what lights up as a kind of way of slightly reducing the kind of cognitive load within an experience of practice, if I'm trying to do things, for instance, on the level of momentum and the level of perception at the same time.
Okay.
So I find it useful to simplify it on that level, because then I can sort of be actively engaging with both of those dimensions at the same time. There are several things about momentum. One of them is that I mentioned before we began, I mentioned this desire that I have to try to bring with me all the things that I have learned, or all the different kinds of ways in which I practiced over time in dance. And so for me, a big part of my early training was Limón. And so this sort of focus on, in a way, momentum, weight, gravity, and so that's something that's very kind of in me. And so I enjoy working with that, and I'm looking for the sort of way of opening towards that, along with other things I've learned later. And then another thing is the thing that I mentioned, which you picked up on while we were moving, about, I guess what I might call getting moving what is fixed in my perception.
Yeah.
And so for me, there's something how being in motion with my weight, with my whole mass, and this sort of rhythmic motion and this kind of wave-like rocking, and we talked about this idea of this sort of like sloshing of water almost, and this sort of constancy of almost like this body of water. Sometimes for me, it feels like that has the potential to support the mobilization of my perception.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I mean when I'm using the language like getting moving what is fixed. So there might be something in my experience of my whole environment, of my whole perceptual reading, which I notice is kind of static or constant, or even like if I was sensing a kind of weather in the space around me, this is sort of like heavy weather, or just something that is kind of stuck in place in my perception.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that, I guess I'm using this sometimes in my experience, that the momentum can be a kind of, can partly support this kind of unfixing, this like unmooring of the things that are really kind of anchored, particularly when they feel in some way like they might be a limitation.
Yeah.
And so this kind of, it's also a relationship for me to ideas about knowledge generation, is this like making possible the becoming of something, making possible a shift in the kind of conditions of possibility. So something like, say even like the walls of the room, I might experience as very fixed and static. And when I start to get into a practice of working with my momentum and perception at the same time, that at least in my experience, I might just start to go somewhere imaginatively and experientially where the room isn't so fixed anymore. And actually the world that I'm in sort of opens up in possibilities in some way. And my momentum, the actuality of my momentum and the rhythmic movement of my mass is part of what helps me get there.
There's a lot to unpack. It's beautiful, and you articulate it so well. I had to think, definitely by the end of the second sort of chapter, or the first chapter, depends on how we divide it, but I'm thinking about the before we started the sort of tighter version of forward and backward. I really felt a sense of I got lost in the momentum, in a sort of beautiful way. I was able to allow exactly that, what lights up, to sort of drift and not be so demanding, as exactly as you say, like everything everywhere all at once type Deborah Hay style of try to be with every sinew in the body simultaneously, right? And what I loved was, I think, when you were speaking about that which is fixed, I think you said something along the lines of, if that's even possible.
Yeah.
And I think that was what was very inviting, was exactly this challenge, maybe, to the possibility of unfixing or moving or changing, and exactly what I think you're pointing to something really fascinating with the experience, that in momentum, even in momentum, in change, can we unfix? Like, what is fixity? When we are so for want of a better word, fluid, like the bag of water, right? Sort of oscillating inside of these conditions of perception and awareness and body and space. And there's something very, beautiful there. And I love, it's beautiful that you do connect it to knowledge. I have to think of epistemological anarchy. This is this philosopher of science, Feyerabend. I'll write it down because I'm not pronouncing anything very well. And he does this very provocative move after Popper, who is another philosopher of scientific method. And he makes this provocation saying, the only way to do science is outside of the method. Sort of insisting that the change comes from happenstance, comes from if whatever you do within the method is only going to reproduce the same method, sort of thing. And I think in a way, and I know you're working with neuroscientists, is that right?
Yeah.
So I think it also produces a challenge to, I'm not agreeing or maybe making any connection with the scientific method, but to the sense of change in the brain. And I have to think of plasticity and how it seems to provide the model for structured structurelessness, a sort of anarchy, an ability to be, to change but still remain structured in some way. At least this is my understanding of plasticity from what I've read of Catherine Malabou. This is a philosopher who looked at the concept of plasticity.
So it makes me want to talk about plural epistemologies.
Oh, nice.
And so I guess this is in relation to lots of different things for me. So, let's say in relation to my work collaborating on research with neuroscientists. So if I were to say that there's a particular epistemology at work in their practice, then I find it really important that the artistic research of my practice or other artists' practice can coexist with bringing different epistemologies that can be in contact with each other, and that can. That's how I see, from my perspective, one of the things that's most important to me about the Neurolive research project that I'm currently still involved with, a 5-year project that is in its 5th year now. They're around these performances that we've made in the past few years, inviting different artists to create new works. The artistic research is happening and the scientific research is happening in these kind of interwoven ways. And so that for me is particularly important coming out of my PhD research, which was before this Neurolive project. And so, these kind of ideas about plural epistemologies, and in relation to my own practice of dance choreography, and specifically something like back and forthing, I also see that, through my understanding, the way that I understand embodiment, I understand my body to contain plural ways of knowing, plural epistemologies. And so I have these embodied capacities, some of which are more rational, some of which, and more sort of towards the rational, the language-oriented. And then I also have embodied capacities of ways of knowing that are felt sense, that are intuitive, that are what I like to think of as more than rational. Yeah. And these things are part of my being. And also, I mean, they can be, one of the ways that they can be described is through, I guess, neuroscientific or cognitive scientific lenses, including the intuitive, including the less conscious or non-conscious. Like all those things can also be described through a scientific lens, and I'm quite excited by the ways in which they are being more and more described and integrated with each other. And so when I refer to cognitive science in my own interests, I'm often referring to those people in that field who are really tuning into those particular ways of knowing and the ways in which they are fundamental and necessary within human ways of knowing. And so people like Guy Claxton is a British, I think he's described himself as a learning scientist.
Oh, cool.
He studies learning and has a really strong focus on the body and movement.
Wow.
And the relationship between body, movement, intuition, and how that relates to intelligence. And so all these kinds of perspectives I find, I find that they have a lot of kinship with the kind of experiences that I think I and lots of other people have in dance practices.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it brings me back again to actually that, and it was really strong in the experience of the practice, the perception of the fixed, or maybe I'm now mixing aspects of the practice, but how that, what I perceive to be fixed in the room or within my body or within the patterning or my choice making or my association, and then how you invite both a trying to make loosen, you spoke about giving it a little bit more space, maybe, that perhaps it could be not necessarily unfixed, but it would somehow somehow shift, maybe. But at the same time, this question also of is it even possible, and exactly in relationship to this felt sense. I love that you, because I love that you connect it to the more than rational, because in the dancing it is a very clear felt sense of now this is something I know or this is something I don't know. There's a real felt understanding of that. The place I notice it the most is actually I am now dancing, I'm not dancing. Actually that felt sense between what I perceive to be fixed maybe as dance and not as dance, because I mean on an intellectual level I can say anything can be dance, but for me to feel it as dance I need to relate to it in a different way. I need to start to or I'm not sure maybe what causes those shifts in consideration, but that fixity and definitely these elements of consciousness, being aware of certain parts of the dance or of what is fixed or not fixed is really important, and returns me again, and I think it's very notable that you're not well, you seem to have an interest with the performance, the presentation of dance. It's so there's also involved in this, and I brought up social contract, right? A making conscious of, or sharing a consciousness of, sharing a perception of something that seems to exist, that a felt sense or a rational understanding, a reading, if we will, right? Yeah. It's super beautiful. The levels, this is what I think I'm trying to describe, is that it goes from a very perceptive, very felt place, and it can be extrapolated right to the stage in a social, political context around knowledge production.
Yes. Yeah, that's definitely how I see it. There was so much in what you just said. A couple of things that came up for me as you were just speaking were when you were talking about feeling what you're doing as dance. It made me think about, I think that for me, it has something to do with the more that I feel that all of my capacities are being engaged, the more I feel that I am doing what for me is dancing. And so that's a kind of an experiential thing, and I guess also I'm associating that with the capacities that I have invested in developing, which are different kinds of capacities over different periods of my dancing life. And so I feel like I'm most fully dancing when I can be engaging as much as possible with all of those at the same time.
Yes.
They're all there.
Yes.
And why not? And yeah.
I think it makes me aware of how. I mean, I feel it's very explicit in what, at least what I experience now, is that there are aspects of my perception of my capacities that are or are not engaged, that sort of drift. I always remember hearing, I feel terrible, I can't remember who said it, but it was some dance choreographer. It said that all dance involves space, time, and movement. And of course I recognize the sentiment, and I also recognize the validity that there is always space, time, and movement present. However, one's approach to the dancing will shift if you come from the perspective of, or the perceiving that dance is now involving space, time, and movement, or thinking through that I'm going to play with rhythm, or I'm going to just have a jiggle around, and not include those concepts. Like the concept produces a specific type of dance in a specific way, and generalizing in that way, and it just reminds me of like what we attend in our dancing is also it becomes a part of it, and the fact that you say the sort of the capacities being engaged, it really resonates with exactly how I feel dance, is that I have an attention to something which is really specific, and it is that kind of engagement. And if I may, it also feels like I am tapping into something divine or spiritual or otherworldly, and not necessarily having to name it as such and structure it as such, if that makes sense. or magic. I think actually your word magic is probably a lot better than those three.
That's the language that I use. Which I think, is magic in a very kind of expanded sense. I contrast it with science, but I also associate it with science. So magic and science at the same time is a phrase for me that comes from Aby Warburg, who was an art historian who died in 1929, who had some very interesting epistemological approaches and a kind of special attention to movement as the lens through which to trace history. Yeah. So the reoccurrence of gestures over time was what he traced. Okay. And so movement became very sort of central part of his way of reading time. And so he has a category called magic and science, which is one phrase, the two of those things held together, which I really love. And so what I take from that in relation to the way that I like to think about choreography and about sort of a choreographic epistemology almost, is this coexistence and complementarity between magical ways of knowing and scientific ways of knowing at the same time, which I think about the scientific ways of knowing as objective ways of knowing, and I think about the magical ways of knowing as subjective ways of knowing. And when I think about my own body, I think about how I have both these objective ways of knowing and subjective ways of knowing always happening in coexistence with each other, in collaboration with each other at the same time.
I've been grappling a little bit with Cindy Millstein, a theorist actually in anarchism. She expressed how one of the challenges with anarchism is to hold both freedom from and freedom for simultaneously, positive freedom and negative freedom, and it somehow resonates, right? That to be with the objective and the subjective simultaneously, it contradicts one another. It feels like they ask for each other to be excluded from one another, and yet at the same time, I think on a felt level, they have to be incorporated somehow.
I don't know. That's a really big question. But I guess the way that I like to think of it is perhaps that a sort of idea about separation between subjective ways of knowing and objective ways of knowing is, at least on some important levels, a cultural thing. A cultural separation. And whereas in actuality, those ways of knowing are not necessarily in opposition with each other, and actually that neither exists without the other. I think it's
No, I mean,
big questions.
No, but it's exactly in the or at least for me, in the material. And I mean, I'm very speculative in my thinking. I mean, it's very clear this is from a PhD. It has a sort of groundedness. There's a sense of it's very Western to actually have this knowledge constructed in this way. I would say.
And so for me it relates to the sort of terms in which I've been thinking for a long time, particularly sort of earlier on before my PhD, about mind and body relationship, or sort of the cultural effects of mind-body dualism.
Yeah.
Thinking about understanding non-dualism between mind and body, which I would relate to these different ways of knowing, and looking at what that could mean in relationship to dance and choreographic practice. It's a lot of what I've been motivated by for a lot of years.
Yeah. And may I ask as well what the weather is, because it was also a reoccurring theme, and it feels very very full as a material. I'm just wondering if you could expand. Maybe it doesn't relate so well to what we were just talking about. But
I think for me, when I use that term, like the weather, taking a reading of the weather, for me that has to do with a felt sense reading of my environment, and this sort of image of understanding my environment as one that's full of weather or weathers, multiple weathers that can be changing, and there could be different weathers in different areas, is this kind of reading of different kinds of intensities in the way that I have a felt sense of the environment that I'm in. And so it's trying to open up towards noticing and reading information, noticing percepts or intuitions or projections or imaginations that are about the whole environment that I'm taking a reading of.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. And you also borrow from Deborah Hay these concepts of cells, because there is something very with the inclusion, the consideration of the weather, there is a potential for, and I think you even said it at some point, where thought could sort of be have a light sort of put on it. I'm butchering your words again.
No.
But it sort of it somehow begs the question of like, how much are we collective and individual as well, and maybe as subjective, objective. I don't know if that resonates at all. With your experience.
I don't know. See, with these kinds of things, it's interesting that I often go to things that I've read that are related to neuroscience, or also maybe not just cognitive science, but also philosophy of cognitive science. And so there, when you're talking about sort of are we individual, the sort of boundariedness of each of us, it makes me think about Andy Clark, a philosopher of cognitive science, who's very interesting. And so some of his past work has to do with this sort of the way that our mind, our cognition doesn't stop at the edges of our skin, but that there are lots of ways in which our cognition extends into our environment, and also in lots of ways. Guy Paxton really goes into this as well, about how our cognition is so relational as well, and how just how interwoven we are, and how not sort of boundaried we are. So I think there's something about this kind of some of this kind of neuroscience perspective that I just find really helpful, because it's very there's something very clear about the propositions that are being made. And sometimes I also really love reading things that are not from within dance or within, even from necessarily very concerned with art, art making, art history, but these sort of like other, touching into something from another discipline sometimes just helps me kind of shift my own thinking more.
Yeah. I mean, it really echoes that sense when dancing, there is a collective quality to the experience. Even within the ballet classes I've done, you're completely muted. I mean, because of the discipline in the room, there's no speaking, or little speaking involved, and yet the communal quality of being in conversation with these different bodies, be it in unison or be it not in unison, but and there's something magical about that as well, right? There's when it brushes up with maybe the narrative, the grand narrative or the learnt narrative of science that we've sort of been taught. I have to think of David Graeber really framed it well for me in a book on anthropology, The Dawn of Everything, I think it's called, and he speaks about how colloquially we have these grand narratives that we start as sort of small bands of communities, and then the bigger the band of people comes, the more control and structure that is needed to control the people, and yet the science actually gives a different story. And then thinking about how these what you're describing through the science that you're reading and so on is actually something of a bigger, more complex picture, a more magical picture than maybe what one would first assume is the nature of personhood, of collectivity, of objectivity, subjectivity.
I absolutely love that. That, because of the way that I use the phrase magic and science, I love the way that you just, framed science as, in some situations, the more magical influence. I love that. And sometimes that is true for me. And but of course, you were talking about, in relation to David Graeber, these kind of like power dynamics.
Yeah.
And in a sense, if I can say it that way. And of course, science has been, often is, a tool of that.
Yeah.
And so I even though I'm interested in engaging with science, for me it's important to also keep approaching this idea of plural epistemologies, as opposed to a kind of hegemony of knowledge that only science can own. And I feel like for me there's something very immediate about that subjective experiences of dancing are these these experiences that are full of knowing, full of the coming into being of knowing, and that they definitely stand in the same world as a system of knowledge like science.
Yeah. It's beautiful. It's really beautiful, and I think I'm going to wrap up a little bit. But I feel so. It's so wonderful actually to be invited to be beside that tension between all of those conflicting knowledges, exactly the pluralistic nature perhaps of knowledge, maybe not conflicting per se makes it too somehow binary.
Yeah, but they also sometimes are conflicting. You have to acknowledge that too.
Of course. But they're not all conflicting. I think that was what I wanted to not emphasize, that it's all conflicting, but that it's plural is a better description. Yeah. And some are conflicting and some aren't, and vice versa. But it's such a pleasure to be beside that, actually, and to invite that into the dancing. And actually, in a lot of ways, you still hold space for your history and background in dancing, coming from Limón and having those practices, those sort of those histories, and yet allowing them to come with you into this sort of research and speculative space. It's such a pleasure. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Well, pleasure to do and talk with you too. Thanks very much.
But if people are curious to get in touch with you or to know about anything that's up and coming, you've mentioned a little bit the work that you'll be doing with
Katie Co.
In Stockholm.
Yeah. So Katie and I will be coming to Stockholm with Know-How Generator for some workshops at SKH and at Dansalliansen, and then 2 performances at SKH presented by Fylkingen. And the performances are October 16 and 17 this year, 2025. And you can, definitely, I would love to hear from people if they would like to get in touch. I have a website with an email. I have various other ways to be in contact, and
yeah, you're very approachable. I'm so grateful. And I mean, and also your PhD work as well has its own website, so people can even delve deeper into what we were doing today. Yeah. In so many, I imagine you have many different ways of approaching it and getting involved.
That website is knowhowgenerator.com, NOHOW, Know-How Generator. Yeah.
I will link everything, and I will also try to write down a catch for the references that came up, and I will keep those in the description. But thank you so much. I'm so grateful, and I look forward to continuing to dance with your ideas and follow you somehow.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Where there's an appetite to unfix something, what if that's possible?